you know, a lot of people are asking, what is open source, right? And so how do you get involved and why should you get involved? And open source is a production method of software. It came out of historically from the wish to be able to work together on fixing software. So when something was broken, you know, because software was easily distributable, a lot of people were using it, and suddenly something broke and people didn't want to wait until a very few people could fix it. They wanted to have actually something that they can fix themselves. That was really the idea of open source software. So you could actually fix it yourself. And it's not very different than having a car, you know, and being able to work on the car yourself and not having to wait until somebody, possibly very expensively, repair it for you. And so then the question is, how did these open source efforts evolved? And they evolved very much like volunteer activity. So if you volunteer for something to help your community, you get involved and you don't actually expect any pay for it, but you might actually pick up some skills. And so just like in volunteer activity, it can be very fulfilling, even though you don't get paid. But in open source software, the interesting thing is that the community work actually became in many cases superior to what the industry could do. Even though, you know, there were volunteers, there were also industry people involved in these open source projects, but it was fundamentally something that the community excelled at, and that these community projects actually ended up moving much faster than the industry could perform. So a good example is Linux operating system, right? That in the last decades moved much faster forward, that it became actually the dominant operating system today than any of the commercial products. All the commercial Unix flavors that came from various companies proved to have been no match against the community work, the worldwide community work in that area. So community work is, it turns out, in many cases superior to commercial and proprietary software development, and moves much faster. And it's also in many ways more fun. And it's also a way to make sure that the work that you're doing in a particular project doesn't just disappear. That was actually the motivation for many famous open source developers. When they worked in startups and in various companies, the open source, the software that they created, when the company didn't succeed, which often happens, then that code disappears. There are no rights. There are, you know, it has to literally be thrown away and destroyed. And so they were sick of seeing all that code that they wrote just disappear, right? And so the nice thing is, if you're an open source software developer, every code you write, every success that you had stays there and is visible. And so that's a job security, right? If you're an open source, you can actually change companies, you can change affiliations, but the work always stays with you. It's not owned by a company, but it's owned by the community that owns that collectively owns the result of your software development. And so there's a number of open source licenses, legal underpinnings that make this work. Obviously, we don't have time today to get into that. But what actually transpired is that the industry really realized that there's a huge amount of value in organizations that know how to interact with open source ecosystems, which are collections of projects that interact with each other. And And that's the best example is maybe that that Red Hat, that probably everybody knows, sold to IBM a couple of years ago for $34 billion. And that's, that's a price tag. $34 billion is a lot of money. And that sort of put open source really on the map. It shows the value. And so industry created new institutions. One of them is the Open Source Program Office. And we are actually now in the process in UC Santa Cruz. We get funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to create an open source program office here in UC Santa Cruz. And this program, this open source research experience, is one of those programs that are being is going to be managed by this open source program office in the OSPO. And one of the things that we want to actually want to accomplish with this open source research experience is we want to bring in students and connect them with researchers and with sponsors. And this can be sponsors from industry or from foundations or from nonprofits, from institutes, research labs. There's many people who can get involved and sponsor summer internships. And this is all revolving around the summer internship idea. So, so I think, I hope I made the case to you that this open source is something that is really important. And now the question is, how should you get involved, right? And the best way is to find a good open source project and find a good mentor. And so within universities, there are lots of research projects that have open source components. And we are actually, as part of the open source research experience, are creating an exchange. This is like not unlike a stock exchange or some other kind of exchange, but it's an exchange of project ideas that you can connect with, and you can basically get involved, contact mentors of project ideas that you find interesting, and that you can, that you can start a relationship with the mentor, and start working with the mentor, and sort of get a feel of whether this is a good relationship, whether there's a good match, whether the project is the right project. There's many other projects you could do instead, right? So you can sort of find a good place among all the mentors, and then and basically once you found a good mentor, you can then, if everything works out, work on an application, to actually a formal application to work on this project for the summer. And then if that application gets accepted, you get actually paid for working with the mentor for the summer on this project. And this is a fantastic way for you to learn how to be involved in an open source project, how to get your experience, how to build out your network, not only with the mentor, but also everyone who is connected to the open source project. And it's basically a way to really build your professional network. And not only within academia, but also with other people who are in connected open source projects. And these open source project communities have lots of experts in industry, and you can, through these communities, they're an excellent way to build relationships to people in industry and other organizations. and maybe find a good job. So why should you start thinking about to get involved now? So we're doing this every year, and there is a timeline. So let me first, before I go to the timeline, just give you one picture about how this looks in, how this looks in our minds. So this is a picture of the stakeholders in this process, right? And so you are the students. You can spend your summer writing code for exciting open source projects. These are getting mentored by scientists that are doing cutting edge research and using open source to amplify the impact of their research and to actually get, a lot of the stuff done that they need to get done. And the sponsors that were getting involved in this process are funding both scientists and students, and they're interested. And these have, again, could be industry, could be also from foundations like the Linux Foundation. They're interested in the new technologies that you are helping to create, but they're also interested in you. They're interested in a new talent. They're interested in finding people who might who might jump into bigger roles after that summer internship. And of course, the scientists are very interested in you because you might decide that you would really like to work in that research project, and it might be something that you consider for graduate school, for instance. And then you have somebody you can refer to when applying to that graduate school, and that's usually, I can tell you as a professor, it's a huge advantage if you have already worked with someone at the graduate school that you're applying for, and they can basically vouch for you. And it's like, yep, I love working with this person, and I really like to have that person accepted to the graduate school. That counts a lot. So the other thing